Hi everyone, my name is Rad Yousefnia and I'm going to present my work today with the title of The Impacts of a Political Quarrel on Heritage, the Case of Traditional Bazaar in Tabriz. A very short introduction. I finished my bachelor degree in Tabriz Azad University and I moved to Turkey, Ankara in 2015 and started my master's degree in architecture in Middle East Technical University. And a few weeks ago, I defended my thesis. And this paper is kind of a subchapter of my thesis work. So let's start the presentation. And before that, I apologize because it would be my first pre-recording presentation. And I know it just mentioned in my abstract that it would be presented personally, but unfortunately, due to some problems with my visa to UK, I could not travel to meet you face to face. So let's start the presentation. As I mentioned in the title, uh, there is a class struggle and kind of conflicts in the interests between uh, different groups, and these conflicts and these um, uh, differentiations in the viewpoints just reflected to the heritage, and it damaged or changed, or it would be better to say transformed, one of the most valuable cultural and historical heritage in Tabriz. Uh, this study is to have an in-depth understanding and evaluating the transformation of public spaces and bazaar area. And in this process, we would consider structural and ideological motivations and relations between public space, state power, and different items. About the case study, I would say that in this process, for the timetable, adaptation process of modernity in Iran is one of the main objectives of this study. And because Tabriz was the gate of modernity during the Qajar period and after that in the Pahlavi dynasty as well, Tabriz affected from this process so much. And the transformation of the public spaces and especially Bazaar area in early years of the 20th century will be considered, will shape, and it shaped the main problematic of the research. As you can see, this is the focus timetable, focus time span that I just drew over here. Um, and this study starts from 1921, I mean the start of the Pahlavi dynasty. It goes a little back for having a historical narration of the case study, and it stops in the Iranian Revolution in the 1979. This is the location of the case study with its neighborhood and on the map of Iran as well. And this is what we have today, the urban form of the Tabriz. I would depart from one of the main viewpoints of Aldo Rossi, which affected so much in this process. And he said, in effect, there is a continuous process of influence, exchange, and often opposition among urban artifacts, and the city and ideal proposal make this process concrete. I maintain that the history of architecture and built urban artifacts is always the history of the architecture of the ruling classes. And from here, we can go to space as occupation and space as a tool of representation, which comes from two prominent scholars in this field, Minkenberg and Henry Lefebvre. And as Lefebvre said, the area where ideology and knowledge are barely distinguishable is subsumed under the broader notion of representation, which thus supplants the concept of ideology and becomes a serviceable operational tool for the analysis of space as of those societies which have given rise to them and recognize themselves in them. So, in this process, who builds what, when, and how, and on the other side, who destroys what, when, and how, shape the main theoretical framework of our study. And it's better to say that during the Pahlavi dynasty, and by building a national nationalist attitudes in government, minorities faced lots of problems. And how these groups faced these problems and how these decisions just changed their lives is one of the uh, main points of this study. As I mentioned, you can see there are lots of uh, ethnic minorities in Iran, but during the Pahlavi dynasty, all the minorities just ruled with one hand and with kind of autocratic way of ruling the country. So we go to the roots of the public space, as the bazaar is one of the most important traditional public spaces in the Iranian cities and its relation to the city and the urban artifact. And as Andy Merrifield mentioned, the city an engine for capital accumulation, on the other hand, and a site for social class struggle on the other hand. It is crucial for the expansion of capitalism and for overthrowing capitalism. It's a theoretical object of curiosity because it's a political subject of necessity. And as you know, during the modernization period, because Iran was encountering with globalization, some of these items can be fit to our case study as well. And if we go to the definition of the public space and public space in Iranian Islamic cities, uh, we have we can make some of important questions for our case study. And after going to the roots of the words in the dictionaries as well, we can build the exact meaning of public space and what we want. And uh, due to the categorization of the space, as we divide it to the public and private, as Madanipur mentioned, we can say access, agency, and interest. And for the access, physical access, access to the activities, access to the information, and access to the resources uh, shapes the main structure of this access issue. And can we mention public space as a destination, or as we said, bazaar as the destination? According to the Kostov, yes, we can. During the history, each public space within the urban form was built by different purposes like ritual and different types of interactions. The other important aspect of these public spaces is being free for everyone's uses, in contrast with, for instance, the private uses of houses and shops inside the commercial spaces of bazaar. And in Islamic cities, as Kostov mentioned again, there are lots of large-scale public spaces like meydans and mosques and bazaars, and due to the solid uh, urban fabric of the cities, they have lots of interactions, physical interactions, and social and cultural interactions with together. And I influenced with the Whose Public Space by Madanipur uh, uh, on the other hand. And as he says, historically, primary public spaces shape the core of urban society, amalgamating political, economic, social, and cultural activities of a small urban population. Because, you know, during those periods, Tabriz was not a big city as well. And the symbolic dimensions of public space are as significant as their functional ones. Much of cultural reading of cities places a performative emphasis on public spaces, seeing them as spaces for performance and assertion of identity. So, departing from this point of view, we have place and space. If I want to refer to the Madanipur, during the Pahlavi period, we have streets that are open streets and opened streets in the urban solid fabric, and we can mention or we can relate them somehow with the Haussmannizations of the 19th century in Europe. And those public spaces with commercial spaces and um, making the transportation hubs inside the cities can be mentioned as space. And the Bazaar area with its historical, cultural, and all those accumulations can be mentioned place, because you know these interactions between two phrases in the urban and architectural scholars. And about ideological transformations, we can refer to Althusser and the Marx as well. And because during the Pahlavi period, there is a ideological um, program for reproducing the state again and producing the uh, I mean producing the nation's meaning again from its historical roots. We can say that uh, ideology does not have a history. Secondly, ideology has material existence. These two ideas lie in the concepts of ideological state apparatuses, repressive state apparatuses. I mentioned these two very important phrases because it really fits to the things that happened during the Pahlavi dynasty. Uh, Finishing here with the theoretical framework, I'm just moving to the case study, and I will just explain the modernization experience in Iran and its impacts on Tabriz and especially on the Bazaar area. Tabriz is one of the oldest and, more importantly, continuously inhabited cities in the region. In some sources, it was mentioned that the initial signs of the civilization go back to first millennium BC. In different periods, Tabriz was the capital city of several dynasties like Ilkhanids, Argoinlus, Garagoinlus, and Safavids. Unfortunately, within its long history, the city was destroyed multiple times by natural disasters like earthquakes and floods. As you can see from this sketch from Chardin in 17th century, Tabriz has a very large scale um, urban fabric, but as I mentioned, the city just destroyed due to several earthquakes and floods. And uh, Qajar dynasty is very important when you're studying Tabriz, because Tabriz selected as the Valiaht Nation, I mean the place for the prince to rule, Azerbaijan as the province and Tabriz as the city. And the princes, before going to be the king, ruled the province and the city. And this important issue brings several things to Tabriz: an active commercial space, which is the Grand Bazaar, concentration of the military inside the city and in some urban areas, in suburban areas, because of its neighborhoods with Russia and Ottomans, and active war zones which were very close to the city, and its political significance, which was functioned as the Valiaht nation, as I mentioned. And as you can see from this map, Bazaar area just shaped a very huge scale inside the walls. Uh, in comparison with the other cities. And one of the most valuable things that I just found during this research was that in all the processes and all the periods, city just recorded with maps and lots of documents. Some with the foreigners that just attacked Tabriz, like Russians, um, or and the other maps just made by um, some of the Iranian scholars that just graduated from Darul Funun. This is one of the oldest maps of Tabriz, miniature map that was drawn by the Matrakçı Nasuh during the Ottoman invasion, and these are the other maps. As we go from the case study to the time period, we can see that during the first years of Reza Khan's ruling, in Majlis, Mossadegh, one of the most prominent names in the history of politics in Iran, made a speech and says that today you deputies of the Majlis wish to make Sardar Sepah Reza Khan a king. The honorable gentleman is now not only prime minister but minister of war and commander-in-chief of the armed forces as well. Today our country, after 20 years of widespread bloodshed, is about to enter a phase of retrogression. One and the same person as king, as prime minister, as minister of war, and commander-in-chief. Even in Zanzibar, no such state of affairs exists. This speech was made in 1925, and in 1926, the powerful prime minister of Reza Shah, Temurtash, mentions these lines in his telegraph to the British secretary, and says that Persia, after 20 years of so-called constitutional government, had made little progress. Everything had to be started over again. And I can mention these lines from Talin Grigor that she just studied architecture and Iranian history of architecture and has lots of contributions in this field. That she says the Pahlavi progress along modern lines was underpinned by a modernist impulse to erase the past, a deep desire to change and start over again, similar to other modernist movements around the world in 1920s and 1930s. The realization of a tabula rasa, a utopian blank slate upon which a new Iran could be convinced over again, and was endemic to the strategies of the Pahlavi modernization. And in this process, unfortunately, buildings and cities were the first to be affected by this desire for change. And we can name Reza Shah era or describe it as the amalgamation of autocracy, attempts of modernization with nationalist attitudes. He had lots of achievements in different fields, but this tendency to be very autocratic just make the things kinds of different. These are the gentlemen behind these modernization projects, the first cabinet of Reza Shah. And again, if we go to the focus time span, we can see that 1921 until 1941 was the period that these people changed the urban artifact very fast, as well as other aspects of life in Iran. One of the most important things that happened in Iran was the demolition of and destruction of the Bagh Shamal, a very huge scale Iranian garden that was just perished in a few years, and it replaced with a military camp. And the Street Widening Act supports these kinds of changes, and as you can see, the Bazaar area was the stronghold for the conservative middle class and the opposition, and by making the new streets, the accessibility for these kinds of sites just made from the military barracks and military sites. And under the strict widening policies, there were easy military access to the dense areas, easy movement of goods and capital, creation of modern infrastructure and communicational networks, unification of space that encouraged cultural homogenization, and new architectural and built environments that was established. Uh, this change was very harsh, even in the parliament again. Another prominent name, Seyit Hasan Modarres, just opposed to the urban renewal programs of the king, and he says modernization had to be distinguished from such lawless acts against the people and their possessions. This is another example that you can see in Hamadan, that they just ripped up the solid urban fabric in 1930s and made a boulevard system that which is very familiar to you in European cities. And these are some of the documents that just the cities um, was ripping off, and these are the photos that captured from Tabriz. This is the aerial photo of Tabriz in 1956, and these are the streets that made during this period. I mean, during the Reza Shah's period, first Pahlavi's period. As we go to the Bazaar and the Tabriz Grand Bazaar, especially, many scholars mentioned that Bazaar is the heart of traditional Iranian city. Without it, a settlement is not considered as a city. Variety of functions which were collected under the name of Bazaar, like social, religious, economic, educational, and cultural functions, are common phenomena for Iranian cities. And during this period, because the clerics and clergymen and the Bazarian, as we mentioned, the merchants of Bazaar had a very close relationship with together. During to the conscription law and clothing reforms, first movements were ignited in Tabriz in 1925, and first gatherings and first fasts were made during this process. You know, there are lots of networks and there are lots of connections between these people, and Bazaar actually functioned as a stronghold and as a place for showing their opposition. And due to these changes, you can see from the upper map lots of new spaces established inside the Bazaar area. As you can see, the new building of the police department just built exactly next to the Bazaar area. The new building for the governor just established in that area. And more importantly, the Bazaar just tore down apart with two streets in this process. Ferdowsi Street just entered the Bazaar area until some points, and the Cumhur Islami Street, today named that Cumhur Islami Street, just tore down the northern and southern part of the Bazaar from each other. And this is the Shamsul-e Palace that just burned in an accident and replaced with a new building. And unfortunately, the thing that really affected the Bazaar area was the expansion of the Darai Street in 1960s. After Reza Shah, Muhammad Reza Pahlavi tries to follow his father's path in modernization. We can say that we couldn't face lots of change in this period regarding to the Reza Shah era, but it is very important to mention the Darai Street in this process, because as you can see, two pictures between uh, these periods, the Darai Street just tore down um, and make a boundary in the eastern side of the Bazaar area as well. And as you can see, lots of commercial spaces um, destructed in this period. And one of the most important things that this street just tore down, the Sahib al-Amr uh, mosque and its madrasa, the school that was connected to each other. As you can see in the upper picture, the street just tore down the mosque and divided its physical connections from each other, divided these this structure. Anyway, if we go back to the focus time span again, we talked from 21 to 41, and from 41 we go to the 79, a very longer period and effective as well. In 57, guarantees for foreign investments and capital uh, was made by the state. Uh, this change affected the rural structures and traditional systems of the agriculture just collapsed in this period. And the second effective things that happened was the White Revolution in 62, that was land reforms and nationalizing forests and pastures. These transformations in society just uh, result huge migrations from rural areas and villages to the cities. And as the suburban areas just got more populations, uh, with little things and with any social and uh, cultural transformations, the protests started. And these protests started in early 60s, and during to the change in each step, um, more populations just attached to the previous ones. And in the last thing just happened was the making two different poles in the society of Iran, one one of them was the elites, and the other one was the uh, conservatives and the people with religious attitudes. And in 1979, revolution happened, and because of providing large open spaces, and because of the educations and the things that happened inside the society, people go out and ask for their rights, and they just uh, wanted to change the society because of the autocracy just emerged inside the um, ruling class of the Pahlavi. And after that, in that period, the merchants of the Bazaar uh, attached to the people as well, and the revolution happened in 1979. And if we go from this part to the conclusion, I would like to finish my presentation with two quotations from David Harvey and Lefebvre. As Lefebvre said, indeed the urban is revolutionary, and as such the revolution will be urban, as one of the main statements that Lefebvre mentioned in the urban revolution. Unfortunately, regardless of being present in the scenes by the people, again the main right neglected, which is one of the most previous rights for everyone in the society. And from here, as we go to the David Harvey, it's a right to change ourselves by changing the city more after our heart's desire. It is moreover a collective rather than an individual right, since changing the city inevitably depends upon the exercise of a collective power over the process of urbanization. The freedom to make and remake ourselves and our cities is one of the most precious yet most neglected of our human rights. I want to finish my presentation with these words that Bazaar is a very important heritage for Iranian cities, but due to these um, rapid transformations and fast change that uh, governments or states want, these urban artifacts just weakened and weakened day by day, and they really damaged physically as well as socially and culturally. And unfortunately, these violence and this process of demolition or transformation didn't stop in any of other fields in urban artifacts, and the new political power and the new tendencies just followed the path in that period, and unfortunately the street widening act didn't stop after 79 revolution, and the Bazaar area tore apart more and more. And as well as Bazaar, other public spaces of today transform rapidly in comparison to the previous period, along with an awkward silence of the society. The historical and collective memory of the city weakened in all these periods, and each group tries to erase the past and build the city all over again. Thank you for your attention. I apologize for little mistakes or the things that just happened during the presentation. Please feel free to get in touch with me. I would like to know your recommendations, your critical views, or anything that you would want to mention about my presentation. Thank you.